Two and a half years on from being diagnosed with breast cancer, I see my cancer as a gift. That might come as a surprise or even sound crazy, but it's true. If I was given the chance to have my old life back, I'd refuse. Because cancer has changed my life for the better. I discovered the lump in August 2021. And I wasn't that concerned initially because it just felt like dense tissue, which is normal for a lot of women and something I was quite used to. But I went to see my GP anyway, and even she didn't seem that concerned, but still referred me to see a specialist because there was some asymmetry. Waiting times were longer than usual due to the recent COVID lockdowns. So in the meantime, I decided to go for a thermogram. And thermography is a type of thermal imaging that picks up tiny increases in heat on the skin and increased growth of blood vessels, which can be a sign of cancer. My result came back a few days before my hospital appointment, and it clearly showed an area of very dense tissue and a large amount of hot areas where there was an increased amount of blood vessels. But while the report expressed some concern, I still assumed it was just dense tissue and didn't really worry. A few days later, as I drove to the hospital, I still wasn't that concerned, assuming I'd just get a quick ultrasound, be told it was just dense tissue, and be heading home after half an hour. But unlike most people whose cancer diagnosis is broken to them with those bombshell words, "You have cancer," mine was more drip fed to me over the course of the 2 hours I was in the breast clinic. After a chat with the consultant, I got onto the couch for her to examine me. And we were just coming out of the second COVID lockdown, but masks were still being worn in hospitals. So all I could see were the doctor's eyes over the top of her mask as she palpated the lump. And I could see concern in them. And it was at this point I knew this lump was not as innocent as I thought. She advised the next step was to get an ultrasound, mammogram, and possibly a needle biopsy. I expressed concern about getting a mammogram as I didn't want to be exposed to radiation and was worried about the location of the lump being right where the compression plate of the mammogram would push down. And my thermogram was of no interest to the consultant. And my concerns about the potential dangers of having a mammogram were just brushed off. And I was sent through for the ultrasound. The radiologist had placed the ultrasound probe on my breast for about 3 seconds before removing it and saying, "Donna, there is a lump and it looks cancerous." And this was the first time I'd heard the C word. And my previous feelings of unconcern were immediately replaced by a sudden nervous unease. My heart was pounding and I could feel intense fear spreading through my body. And I was, of course, going into shock, but this had little bearing on the doctor's impatience to proceed with the next tests, a mammogram and a biopsy. And I again expressed my concerns about mammograms to the radiologist. The ultrasound had confirmed there was a lump, so why was a mammogram required as well, especially if they intended to do a biopsy anyway? She advised a mammogram caused much less radiation than a chest x-ray, and I subsequently looked this up and found their information to be incorrect. A single chest x-ray emits about 0.1 millisieverts of radiation to the whole torso, and that's without the need to crush any body parts between two plates. Whereas a mammogram involves at least 2 x-ray images of each breast, each of which is squashed twice between 2 hard plates to the point of pain. A 3D mammogram, which is often done in addition to the 2D mammogram, crushes each breast for a second time and takes multiple x-ray images, so the true radiation exposure all to my breasts was likely closer to 3 millisieverts. And that's the equivalent of about 24 chest x-rays. So not the tiny fraction I was told. And it's virtually impossible to find any information online about the exact radiation dose obtained from a 3D mammogram. Which begs the question, why is this information not readily available? But this research was all in hindsight. In that clinic room, I was quickly descending into a state of shock and was being hastily encouraged to undergo further tests without proper informed consent and without any consideration that these tests might not actually be necessary or in my best interests. I quickly became aware of the patient pathway conveyor belt I was on, but like a rabbit in headlights, I lacked the mental capacity, the emotional stability, and the confidence to consider jumping off, especially without all the information to which I had a right but had been denied. I didn't want a mammogram, but here I was being pushed into having one done under a guise of informed consent and my best interests. My bodily autonomy was being controlled by someone else. My concerns, my personal wishes, and my choices were being minimised and disregarded, and all my power was being handed over to the doctors, who seemed to be exploiting my fear and shock in order to adhere to their mandatory patient pathway. It was painfully obvious, just 20 minutes into my appointment, that every single breast cancer patient was likely herded through the exact same sequence of tests, much like sheep through a dip. And as expected, the mammogram was nothing short of eye-watering agony. In my state of what I can only describe as paralysed terror, I reluctantly agreed to having only my left breast scanned initially, but they continued to pressure me into having not only my right breast scanned, but also a 3D scan. The plate put so much pressure on my breasts, it felt like they were literally about to burst. And despite calling to the radiographer not to push the plate down any further because I'd reached the very limit of my pain threshold, she still gave it an extra turn. And this final turn of the knob just seemed to wring out the last ounce of power I had left. I no longer felt like a person with a name and with ownership of and autonomy over her own body. Here I was just an NHS number. By now I was traumatised with shock and just numb with fear, and I felt backed into a corner with nowhere to go. The biopsy was presented to me as something that just had to be done now, not as an option to consider in my own time. And I expressed concern about biopsies puncturing a tumour and potentially causing tumour cells to spread, which has been demonstrated clearly in the research. But I was simply told there's no evidence of that. None of my concerns were being given any credibility, and my reluctance to proceed quickly to having all of these tests carried out in such quick succession without being given adequate information, or even just some time to at least get over the initial shock of my diagnosis, was just met with impatience. And I felt like I was just being a hindrance. That awkward patient who can't just trust the experts and do as they're told. So, in my state of traumatised shock and fear, I surrendered to the biopsy too. After which, I was taken back through to the breast surgeon, who confirmed to me it is cancer. A junior doctor and 2 nurses were also in the room. So I just sat facing 4 pairs of eyes over masks, staring at me in silence. I don't know what they were expecting from me, but I just sat there, staring at the floor, thinking, is this it for me? Am I going to die soon? Is my life over? I just mumbled, what now? And the doctor advised my biopsy results would come back in a week. No counselling offered, no time with a cancer care nurse, not even advice on where to go to arrange counselling. I was just sent home. I remember staggering out of the hospital in a daze and taking a huge gulp of air as I walked out onto the top level of the multi-storey car park. I felt sick, I was still shaking, and I was drenched in sweat. But I found myself immediately making a plan. Before I'd even reached my car, I knew I needed to make some radical and immediate changes to my health. I needed to feel the sense of changing course towards health, and detox and diet was where I was going to start. I broke the news to my mum, who was, of course, devastated, but was such a support to me. She really helped me through those first few awful days of shock. And just a week prior to my diagnosis, I'd brought home a kitten who turned out to be a little furry angel sent from heaven. At night, he would curl up against my chest and his fur would just be wet with my tears. I'd just cry all night. I cried for days. I was just so grief-stricken, grieving both my old life as well as the future life I was faced with losing, and feeling an overwhelming sadness when I considered the pain my mum would go through if she lost her only daughter. I had regular nightmares and panic attacks at night. Most nights I just sat weeping on the bed in the spare room, clinging to my kitten. And in the days I just had to get out the house and took long walks on the beach or out in the forest, anything to help calm my nerves. Well, we broke the news to some of my immediate family. For some reason, I couldn't tell anyone else. I suppose everyone deals with a cancer diagnosis differently, but first of all, I just didn't have the emotional capacity or mental clarity to repeatedly explain my circumstances to all my family and friends, who would inevitably want to show their support and ask for updates. But I also felt I needed complete solitude and privacy to think clearly without any external influence. There was a sort of inner voice or sense that was telling me, you need to keep this to yourself for now. It was like my intuition was telling me I had some big decisions coming my way and I needed to walk this path alone for now. The following week, the doctor confirmed stage 2 estrogen positive invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast. The malignant tumour was 5.7 centimetres and there was DCIS extending to over 10 centimetres. Due to the size and the margin needed to remove the tumour, lumpectomy and reconstruction of the breast wouldn't be possible. So the doctor recommended a complete mastectomy. So more bad news. Last week I'm told I have cancer. This week I'm told I have to have my left breast cut off. But of all the treatments that were to be offered to me, a mastectomy was one that didn't so much feel right, but didn't feel wrong. I reasoned that of all the body parts I could lose, I'd much rather lose a breast than an arm or a leg or an eye, as some people have to deal with. It was horrible knowing I had this large cancerous tumour growing inside me. I just wanted it removed. So my surgery was scheduled 3 weeks later, and this would involve a sentinel node biopsy to see if the cancer had spread to the lymph nodes in my armpit. My doctor also recommended a CT scan to check for metastases to other parts of my body. And of course, I had the same concerns about radiation, especially knowing that CT scans emit much more radiation than a mammogram, mainly because they take multiple X-ray images across large areas of the body. But again, I was assured the radiation was minimal, and again, my concerns were brushed aside. As with all the previous tests, the CT scan was also pushed until I surrendered. But looking into the research later, I discovered that whole body CT scans can emit over 30 millisieverts of radiation, which is the equivalent of 1,500 chest x-rays. And that's research from the British Medical Journal. I mean, to put that into perspective, that's about the same dose received by the people living within a 30-kilometre radius of the Chernobyl explosion before they were evacuated some days later. Would patients be so agreeable to CT scans, and in cancer often repeated scans, if they knew this information? I mean, of course, CT scans have their place, but are patients being given enough information? Are CT scans always being used only when absolutely necessary, or are they being used too much? Immediately after my diagnosis, I went on a radical detox mission. And for the next 4 months, I quit alcohol, meat, dairy, eggs, sugar, refined seed oils, and all processed foods, and ate nothing but a huge variety of raw organic vegetables and fruit. I bought a juicer and made daily juices with kale, spinach, watercress, chard, celery, an apple or pear, as well as carrot, beets, and all sorts of fresh herbs like coriander, parsley, and mint. I made massive rainbow salads with just about every vegetable I could think of, and started taking several more vitamin supplements. I launched myself into researching healing cancer as a full-time job. Apart from when I was scrubbing and chopping fruit and vegetables or juicing, I was glued to my laptop, looking at all the literature I could find on natural cancer therapies, and I powered through books within days. Every evidenced nutrient supplement or treatment I came across, I added to my protocol. It gave me a sense of control and empowerment, and it kept me positive. And I was in quite a fortunate position because I studied physiology at uni and did further courses in nutrition. I've always been fascinated by how the body works, in particular how our bodies can heal naturally. And I've always believed that the body can heal and find its natural state of health without pharmaceutical drugs, which don't address the cause of illness and can only manage symptoms, while at the same time adding to the body's toxic burden and having side effects. Side effects that usually end up requiring further medications. I had my surgery on the 22nd of October and returned to hospital 2 weeks later for a checkup and for the results of the sentinel node biopsy and CT scan. Everyone was still in masks, so I was again greeted with just eyes and no smiles. And I could see the same concern in the consultant's eyes as when I last saw her. So my stomach tightened and I braced myself for bad news. And she said, the good news is your CT scan was clear, so it's not stage 4. The not so good news is that both your sentinel nodes were positive for disease. So that means it's now stage 3. My mum gave out a gasp. I just went numb again and felt sick. It was like every appointment brought more bad news. She went on to give her recommendations. Further surgery to remove all the lymph nodes from my armpit, 18 weeks of chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and then hormone therapy for 10 years. I just shook my head in disbelief, staring at the floor. I'd hoped so much that having the mastectomy would have removed the tumour, but being told the cancer had spread effectively meant the surgery was too late. I remember thinking, it's too late. This is it for me. Am I going to die soon? And that sickening fear filled my stomach again. I asked if the biopsy and surgery might have caused the cancer to spread to my lymph nodes. But while the doctor quickly refuted this theory, it is shown in the research. And it makes sense. If you repeatedly puncture a tumour with a needle that's effectively a hole punch that pulls out tumour tissue and cause bleeding in doing so, does it not make sense that tumour cells will escape into the bloodstream and lymph and spread to the lymph nodes? The multiple extreme emotions that rise up in response to being told you have cancer leave you mentally and emotionally paralysed. It's absolutely impossible for anyone to make any sort of decision in that state. But that's how all cancer patients are made to decide about all of their subsequent tests and treatments, in a state of numb shock and terrorised trauma. Doctors provoke a sense of urgency and give the impression that there's no time to spare. Even if they don't explicitly say it directly, they imply a need to act quickly just by the provocative language they use and how hastily they want you to move on to the next test or treatment. You're also made to believe that there's absolutely no choice. You either take the treatments they suggest or you die. I just couldn't bear the thought of chemo. It went against everything I believe in. I felt like a caged animal backed into a corner. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I felt sick and terrified, and everything just felt so wrong. But I reasoned in my head at the time, of course it feels wrong. It's never going to feel right sitting in a cancer clinic. But this sense of wrongness just wouldn't leave me. That same voice seemed to start up again, but this time it was screaming at me. This is wrong. This isn't for you. Get off this path. It felt like I was on a boat on river rapids, drifting towards a big waterfall, and I had this overwhelming desperation to jump off and try to swim ashore. I mumbled, "I don't want chemo," and we all sat in silence. The doctor then cautiously asked, "What are your reasons for not wanting chemo?" And I told her, I just don't believe in it. I don't believe it can heal me. Even at this early stage, I just didn't agree that injecting highly toxic chemicals that are carcinogenic in themselves and that would completely annihilate my immune system into my already toxic body would be what I needed in order to heal. This cancer didn't invade my body from the outside. These were my cells. To me, they needed less toxicity, not more. The idea of poisoning and irradiating the cancer from my body just didn't make sense to me. And at no point so far had there been any testing into the cause of my cancer. The doctor hadn't even suggested any potential causes. And when I asked what might have caused my cancer, she just shrugged and mentioned something about genetics. Conventional medicine, it seems, isn't interested in investigating the cause of illness, only managing symptoms. Or when it comes to cancer, merely slowing the growth of cancerous tumours and buying time. But when we have a problem with our car and we take it to a mechanic, we don't expect the mechanic just to hide the problem. We expect him to find and repair the root cause of the problem. So why, when we have a problem with our bodies, is it perfectly acceptable to completely dismiss the potential root cause of the illness and instead just suppress symptoms with synthetic, and in the case of chemo, highly toxic pharmaceutical drugs? Slowing the spread of my cancer and merely buying time fell way short of not only what I wanted, but what I thought was possible. The doctor continued to stare at me with a look of sympathy, as if she felt sorry for my fear and confusion. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she said, "This is treatable." And while I appreciated she meant well and had nothing but good intentions, it all still felt completely wrong to me. She sat staring at me, waiting, with her pen poised over a form. She was clearly waiting for my consent to proceed with booking the next surgery. I just needed to get out of there, so just shrugged and said okay. And she ticked some boxes and passed the form to the nurse. And my second surgery was booked 3 weeks later. I continued with my healthy eating and detox plan and further immersed myself in researching natural treatments. But knowing the cancer was still in my body made me move up a gear. As long as I remained completely focused on what had now become my project of detoxing my body and bombarding my system with optimum nutrition, I had hope and I felt empowered. And I was enjoying my new diet because I made sure every meal was so varied and delicious, it was impossible for me to fall off the wagon. I was engrossed in reading about nutrition, natural health, and holistic cancer therapies, all of which I found fascinating. But I was also beginning to find more and more people across the world who had healed their cancer naturally. People who had not only reached a more advanced stage of cancer and who were in a much worse state of health than me, with multiple metastases throughout their organs and in their bones or brain, but people who had been through all the conventional cancer treatments, in many cases several courses of chemo and radiation, but people who had been told by their oncologist that they only had a few months to live and should go home, sort their affairs and prepare to die. Story after story, I was reading about how these people, who had nothing else to lose, refused to listen to their doctor, refused to believe that there was nothing else that could be done, and instead turned to natural therapy options. Some through holistic cancer clinics, some on their own. These people made radical changes to their diet and lifestyle and embraced natural and holistic treatments and supplements such as IV vitamin C, curcumin or mistletoe therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, coffee enemas, water fasts, juice cleanses, cannabis oil or hyperthermia or sauna therapy, numerous therapies we never hear about in conventional medicine, and turned their cancers around. So many I read about are still alive 10, 20, or even 30 years later, with no evidence of their disease. I read their stories and listened to their interviews in amazement as they described how they returned to hospital for a scan and their oncologists were in complete shock when their patient, who should have died months ago, not only walks into their clinic, but whose tumours completely disappeared. My research revealed numerous medical doctors and scientists who left their often distinguished careers in allopathic medicine or well-paid jobs in big pharma-funded research to train and work in integrative, functional or holistic cancer care. Book after book, research paper after research paper, interview after interview, I came across repeated stories of cancer patients defying the odds and healing their cancer naturally. Previously, I wouldn't have thought it possible to reverse a so-called terminal, advanced stage 4 cancer through natural therapies alone. But it made sense to me. I believe my body made my cancer, so my body can unmake it if I remove the factors that likely caused it, while at the same time create the healthy conditions that allow it to heal. The more I researched natural and holistic cancer healing protocols, the more I learned of how they are largely censored and suppressed by mainstream media. And the more I discovered about the history of allopathic medicine and the pharmaceutical industry. There's a deep rabbit hole that you can go down on that topic, but let's just say that there's a lot of corruption, fraudulent safety data, and manipulated statistics in the science we're asked to trust. And if you look critically enough, you find there are numerous vested interests, shall we say, across scientific research, higher education, politics, and mainstream media. The bottom line is, and this is a challenging but important realisation to reach, that pharmaceutical companies don't make money out of healthy people or dead people. So why would they want to find a cure for cancer, or any chronic illness for that matter? They'd go out of business. Their very existence, and certainly their profit, relies on people being sick. it wouldn't be a very good business model to develop cures for chronic illness. The business model of the pharmaceutical industry is merely symptom management. Big Pharma sees cancer as a business, and a very lucrative one. And I didn't want to become a customer. I wasn't satisfied I'd been given enough information regarding the risk versus benefit for the treatments that had been offered to me. So I searched for studies on the absolute survival outcomes as well as the side effects. And this is where my suspicion that the benefits of the treatment were being played up and the risks played down was further increased. Studies show that the conventional treatments, including surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and hormone therapy, don't actually enhance overall survival and only have the aim of suppressing symptoms and buying time. Not to mention all their undesirable side effects, like immunosuppression, radiation burns, radiation damage to the heart, early menopause, osteoporosis, and potentially an increased risk of cancer. In fact, studies show the overall contribution of chemotherapy to 5-year survival rate to be around 2%, and as low as 1.7% for breast cancer. Put that another way, that's over a 98% failure rate. Now, I'm not saying I'm against conventional medicine, or even all pharmaceutical drugs for that matter. When it comes to the acute care setting, conventional medicine is incredible. If you break a bone in a fall, or are severely injured in a car accident, or suffer a head injury, or need emergency surgery, then the hospital is where you want to be. But for chronic illness, all conventional or allopathic medicine can really offer you are pharmaceutical drugs that manage symptoms without treating the cause of illness. I believe that pharmaceutical drugs have their place, but should they not be used more as a temporary measure or last resort? Pain medication can relieve a headache so you can get through the rest of your day at work, but taking analgesics long term is never going to cure your chronic headaches. In the same way, insulin injections are never going to cure your type 2 diabetes, and diuretics aren't going to address the cause of your high blood pressure. Even chemotherapy, I believe, can have its place, but shouldn't it be used in emergency situations instead of as the main treatment? For example, perhaps to shrink a tumour that's pressing on a vital organ, or to enhance the potential success of surgery, or in much lower doses, as in insulin potentiated therapy or IPT. And when it comes to screening for breast cancer in healthy women, is crushing the breasts between two hard plates and subjecting them to ionising radiation every 1 to 2 years really in women's best interests? We don't screen men for testicular cancer in the same way, so why is it applied to women's breasts? Does mammography actually prevent death from breast cancer? Or does it merely enhance the 5-year survival rate because cancers are identified earlier without actually reducing deaths beyond 5 years? I was still having trouble sleeping, and most nights I just lay awake in the dark with my kitten. I lay awake desperately trying to come to some sort of conclusion as to which treatments to accept. I still hadn't told anyone about the cancer beyond my very immediate family and close friends, and even some of them didn't have the whole story. I felt so lost and isolated. And then one night I just posed the question, what about none? I'm not sure who exactly I was asking, but I just posed the question in my mind and waited. And my mind suddenly went silent and a feeling of calmness came over me, like the fear lifted slightly. And I sat up and asked again, what if I don't get any of these treatments and just walk away? In all my shock and fear, walking away isn't something that ever crossed my mind. But as soon as I actually considered it, I felt a sudden sense of all that wrongness that I felt previously falling away and everything feeling right. That inner voice suddenly screamed a relieved yes. And all of my feelings of dread, the helplessness, the hopelessness, and the anxious confusion changed like a switch to a sense of overwhelming relief, total certainty, and a feeling of empowerment and positivity. I knew this was going to be a huge leap of faith, but it was a leap I was ready to take. I knew it was going to be an epic task that was going to require a huge amount of time, effort, and devotion. But it was a project I was ready and willing to take on. I was nervous telling my mum about wanting to refuse all of the conventional treatments because I didn't want to cause her any more stress. But she showed no hesitation in agreeing with me and supporting me in my decision. She recognised the upturn in my mood, my outlook, and my mindset, and she agreed with my decision to walk away from the conventional treatments. But most importantly, she had absolute faith in me and promised to support me all the way in any way she could. So that day, I wrote a letter to my breast surgeon advising I'd made the decision not to go ahead with any of the recommended conventional treatments. And a week or so later, I received a letter with an appointment for a consultation. I was nervous before my appointment because I anticipated being pressured by further coercion and gaslighting disguised as gentle encouragement and informed consent. And while I felt confident in my research and absolutely assured in my decision, I felt it likely I wouldn't be taken seriously. I suspected I'd likely be viewed as that one loner who goes against doctors' advice, seen as a gullible conspiracy theorist who'd gathered all her information from Dr. Google. I imagined the doctor internally rolling her eyes or maybe talking to the nurses about me after I'd gone, them all shaking their heads in disbelief at what they viewed as my stupidity. But am I gullible when I don't just take the questionable information I'm told by the hospital and instead research the scientific literature myself to establish the true absolute survival outcomes and information on risk versus benefit and potential side effects? Am I stupid to believe that cutting out lymph nodes, injecting toxic chemicals into my body, radiating my heart with ionizing radiation, and taking synthetic hormones is somehow going to heal me without ever even looking into the root cause of my illness? The doctor thanked me for coming and advised she just wanted to have a chat about my decision face to face. She admitted, there isn't a pathway for you, so I don't really know what to do with you. And there was that pathway word again, that sheep dip through which every patient is herded. It became increasingly apparent that NHS doctors are effectively handcuffed to these pathways. They're not allowed to use their years of education, training, and experience to determine the best treatment for each individual patient. and they're certainly not allowed to consider any form of treatment or advice that's not on the hospital protocol. I then asked, I'm not getting any further treatments, but what monitoring is available to me? Can I come back for blood tests? And she replied, we wouldn't do any blood tests to monitor, we just check for lumps. So it appears the only way conventional therapies are assessed as successful or not is if you're still alive after 5 years. If you're still alive 5 years after diagnosis, even if you still have cancer, you go down as a cancer survivor thanks to chemo. But if you're dead, the cancer wasn't caught early enough, never that the conventional treatments didn't work. And this certainly made me consider the push for earlier screening. It certainly makes chemo appear more effective if diagnosis day is brought forward when we use a 5-year survival rate. The only monitoring offered to breast cancer patients is a yearly mammogram, each time adding at least another 10 chest x-rays worth of ionising radiation to the remaining breast. And what's even more worrying is that studies have shown the radiation dose from each mammography image can vary wildly from as low as 0.1, the same as a chest x-ray, to over 13 millisieverts. And a fifth of examinations take more than 4 images of each breast. She then turned to the computer and said, I'll give you your stats anyway, just so you're aware. So after a bit of typing and mouse clicking, she read from the screen. Having only had the mastectomy and having no further treatments, your 10-year survival is 36%. 36%? I thought, what does that even mean? That only 36 women out of 100 who refuse treatments survive 10 years? Well, considering she had no idea what to do with me, suggested she'd never come across this situation before. So just how many women have opted not to have conventional treatments? And it certainly can't come from any scientific studies because there has never been any placebo-controlled trial of any chemotherapy drug. Then I found myself getting quite angry. Angry not just at how the doctor looked up information about the odds of me dying before my 50th birthday, like she was checking when her MOT was due, but angry at how doctors feel they have the right to instill beliefs about how long you might survive and when you might die into your consciousness. They have no idea and no say-so when someone is going to die. And certainly neither does a computer. She then went on to say chemotherapy will provide an additional benefit of 14%. So again, with the misleading relative percentages that refer only to my odds of surviving past 10 years, without any insight into the cause of my cancer and without any aim of actually curing it. Based on the studies I'd researched, this 14%, although already small, still seemed hugely optimistic. The true additional benefit of chemotherapy in general has been shown to be closer to around 2%. Patients generally aren't given survival stats in absolute terms of months or years, unless assumed terminal. They're usually only given misleading and confusing percentages that they don't really mean much on their own without context. Now, I'm not saying chemo is the wrong choice for everyone or that chemo never works. What concerns me is the lack of truly informed choice and the imbalance of how risk versus benefit is presented to patients. The benefits are played up and the risks are played down. Would so many patients choose to go through with chemo if they knew it's not a cure and doesn't even have the aim of being a cure? Would patients subject themselves to all the side effects of chemo if they knew it might only add a few months to their life? If patients understood that conventional medicine's definition of survival isn't being cured of cancer and eventually being completely healed, but instead refers only to still being alive after 5 years, would so many people still choose chemo? The other problem I have with giving a percentage survival or number of months or years to live is that it cements the belief that the patient can't be cured. But there are numerous advanced stage 4 so-called terminal cancer patients across the world who were therapied out by conventional medicine and sent home to die, who turned their cancer around. Their doctor will inevitably have initially told them a percentage survival rate and eventually an estimated amount of time that they had left. But their doctor was proven wrong. Doctors can be wrong. So a terminal prognosis should never ever be believed. We just sat in silence, and she looked at me with that same look of sympathy and said, "We just have different beliefs." I just replied, "Yes, we do." And I left, knowing two things. One, that I would never set foot in that cancer clinic again. And two, that I would be in that 36%. The realisation that I was now completely on my own without any medical care or supervision was daunting, to say the least. But was at the same time liberating, because it meant I now had complete control over my health and essentially my destiny. Cutting ties with the conventional medical system removed a lot of my fear, which I realised was being driven by the thought of the treatments. Treatments I felt offered nothing in the way of a cure and failed to address the root cause of the cancer. So I was now free to fully embrace the natural healing protocols that I believed in. And just being guided to do so felt like I was being given a second chance. I sensed a transition from a fear of death to a gratitude for life. And that's what gave me the motivation and mindset to dedicate myself 110% to the massive action I had to take. I knew I had to be all in, like my life depended on it, because it did. So for the first 4 months, I focused on detoxification through a completely organic raw diet, which involved cramming as many different nutritious vegetables, fruits, fresh herbs and sprouts into freshly squeezed juices, smoothies and enormous salads. And I did several juice cleanses and water fasts. To support detoxification, I did daily coffee enemas and infrared saunas, and I still do regularly. Epsom salt baths, rebounding and lymphatic massage, and I took several supplements like zeolite clay, activated charcoal, chlorella, and modified citrus pectin. And I also detoxed my environment. So I swapped all my body care and makeup and cleaning products to natural or homemade. I swapped out plastic food storage tubs to glass, non-stick cookware to stainless steel. And to filter my water, I got a reverse osmosis water filter. I just bombarded my body with nutrients, both from my varied raw diet, as well as numerous vitamin supplements like vitamin D, B complex, vitamin C, tocotrienols, and omega-3. And I learned of so many supplements that are known to be anti-cancer, like curcumin from turmeric, EGCG from green tea, astaxanthin, beta-glucans, and NAC. And of course, I initially lost a lot of weight, but I felt great. I felt better than I've ever felt in my life. I had some other tests done. Initially, tests that assessed my estrogen status because my cancer was estrogen receptor positive. And these revealed an imbalance in how my liver was detoxifying estrogen. So I focused on the foods and supplements that support this. In particular, eating broccoli sprouts, which are high in sulforaphane, and flax seeds, which help the body excrete excess estrogen and xenoestrogens, the synthetic estrogens. And I took supplements like indole 3 carbinol and calcium D-glucarate. I also got my Mirena contraceptive coil removed, and a few months later, into the new year, I got another thermogram done. And interestingly, the overall heat profile was dramatically reduced, which was reassuring to see in my remaining breast because I was always living with the fear of a new lump. Throughout 2022, I stuck to my plan relentlessly. I was on a mission to literally save my own life. I'd still only told a few people about the cancer, and I wasn't really socialising much, so was quite isolated. But I was so focused on my healing plan. I was always busy, and I actually found the solitude and isolation only served to keep my positive mindset and maintain total focus on my daily programme. I didn't want anyone's sympathy, however well intentioned, and I felt I kind of needed to shield myself from any negative concerns or opposing opinions that could distract me from my goal or start to sabotage my fighting spirit or self-belief. I continued with a varied plant-based diet, but I introduced some cooked foods, including cauliflower, broccoli, mushrooms, cabbage, beans, lentils, quinoa, etc. And I started eating nuts and seeds, as well as superfood powders like spirulina, amla, matcha, and acai. Throughout 2022, I had some other tests done, including an RGCC test, which is a kind of blood biopsy. That's basically a count of your circulating tumour cells. Less than 5 is considered to be either early disease or disease responding to treatment. And my result was 4.1. So about 1 year on from diagnosis, I was pleased to be under 5. Stage 3, with a nearly 6 centimetre tumour, couldn't exactly be considered as early disease, so I took this result as responding to treatment, responding to the protocol I'd applied over the last year. And then later in 2022, I returned to work, and then I found a local functional doctor who ordered some other tests that assessed my microbiome, my nutritional and hormonal status, and my metabolic and detoxification genetics. And these provided very useful guidance as to what supplements to reduce or stop altogether, as well as other supplements to start. So I started taking supplements to further support liver detoxification, such as alpha-lipoic acid, choline, CoQ10, as well as some herbal supplements like milk thistle and dandelion root. In the first year after diagnosis, I stuck so rigidly to my cancer healing programme and made enjoying it just as important. By year 2, I made it into a permanent lifestyle. There would, of course, be no point in returning to old ways when many of those will have contributed to my situation in the first place. My belief is that cancer cannot grow in a healthy inner terrain. So if I want to have the best chance of healing my cancer and remaining cancer-free for the rest of my life, then my healthy lifestyle must be permanent. I'd invested so much time and effort into physical detoxification and nutrition. But in all my research, I kept coming across advice around addressing the emotional and spiritual causes of cancer, and that these shouldn't be neglected. The research clearly shows how long-term stress, childhood traumas, and repressed emotions contribute to physical disease. So now that I felt I had the physical side of things in hand, I redirected my reading and research towards how to reduce stress, heal past trauma, and how to harness the power of the mind in physical healing. I felt guided that this was the final piece of the puzzle, and read books by Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk. I started meditating daily, following the work of renowned experts like Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Bruce Lipton, and eventually started writing and recording my own meditations. I started using visualizations to picture in my mind's eye things like toxic heavy metals being filtered by my blood, and immune cells engulfing and destroying cancer cells. In my sauna, I'd visualise toxins being excreted from my blood via the sweat and picture cancer cells dying off in the heat. I've come to learn that our physiology doesn't know the difference between the emotion of a true experience in reality versus one created in the mind. Dr. Joe Dispenza has said many times, if the mind can make us ill, then doesn't that mean the mind can make us well? He also says, if you mentally rehearse an unknown future with a conscious intention, combined with an elevated emotion, and do it repeatedly, then you're signalling real neuroplastic changes in your brain and epigenetic changes in your body. It can be a challenge to literally feel an emotion about something in the future, to feel gratitude for something you're yet to receive, which is what makes this type of meditation so difficult for a lot of people. But from the day I walked out the hospital, I had a clear, conscious intention of complete healing. That and my unshakable faith in the body's ability to heal itself gives me absolute certainty I am healing. So in meditations, I easily release fear and feel the elevated emotions of relief, appreciation, thankfulness, and of course, gratitude. I apologise to my body for unconsciously contributing to a toxic inner terrain. I ask my body for forgiveness and let it know I've learned to appreciate and cherish my health. I thank the cancer cells for adapting to save my life. I thank my immune system for healing the cancer and granting me another chance. And I send love to any remaining cancer cells, and I bless my body and my health for its greatest good. I don't get up from my meditation until I feel the overwhelming sense of gratitude that my prayers for healing have already been answered. I had another liquid biopsy test done at 2 years since diagnosis, this time a test called CancerTrack. And my result wasn't 0 or negative, but it couldn't have been any lower. So 2 years on and everything was stable. And the result, of course, not only brought huge relief and reassurance that all my hard work was paying off, but it gave me the inspiration to continue sticking to my plan. People often ask me what I think caused my cancer. And I've learned of so many different things that trigger cancer and encourage it to grow. Many different environmental, metabolic, chemical, nutritional, and emotional factors that together in a kind of perfect storm cause a toxic inner terrain and DNA damage and metabolic malfunction of cells, which begin to chronically ferment sugar in a lack of oxygen. Conventional medicine still endorses genetics as the main cause of all cancers, but we know now that it's more likely to be only about 5 to 10% of cancers that are truly genetic. Believing the dogma that cancer is always purely genetic keeps patients as helpless victims. It has the patient believe that their cancer was just bad luck and that they in no way contributed to their disease. And this leaves patients, I think, with the mistaken belief that there's nothing they can do themselves to heal their cancer. It effectively deceives patients of their power, so they hand over complete control of their bodies and their life to their doctor. Patients become victims instead of leaders of their chosen treatment path, whatever that may be, or champions of their own healing journey. In my case, I suspect it was probably a combination of hormone imbalance, estrogen dominance, exposure to xenoestrogens, the Mirena coil and contraceptive pill, inefficient liver detoxification, too much alcohol, not enough sleep, too much stress, childhood traumas, repressed emotions, wearing underwired bras, heavy metal toxicity, aluminium antiperspirants. There's rarely, if ever, a single cause. But I believe most causes of cancer are within our power to reverse, and so is cancer. People also often ask me what advice I would give to other people in the same situation. And obviously, I can't ever advise anyone on how to treat their cancer. Everyone has to choose their own path on that one. But to anyone just diagnosed, I would tell them, first of all, that things are not as urgent as the doctor makes out. Even if they don't explicitly say it, they imply there is no time to spare, and they pressure you into undergoing numerous tests and quickly proceeding straight to conventional treatments. But once a tumour's been discovered, it's likely been growing for years. Even in the most extreme of situations, like stage 4 pancreatic cancer, you likely still have time just to go home and take a few days to go over the initial shock, which will never be more terrorising than on the day of diagnosis. It's impossible to make decisions in that state, but they pressure you to do so anyway. Decisions made all the more difficult by the fact they downplay your concerns and play up the potential benefits of the test or treatment they want you to take. It's also worth remembering that conventional treatments are one option. Doctors imply your only choice is chemo or death. But this has been disproven by many. So-called spontaneous remissions are anything but. If you want to look into how people have healed their cancer without chemo, then you have the time and the right to do so. Thirdly, I'd say to remember that you are the owner of your body. No one, not even doctors, can decide for you what tests or treatments you have. They can only give their recommendations. It's vital to find the confidence to assert autonomy over your body and not be coerced or manipulated by other people's opinions, whether doctor or family or friends, and however well intentioned. The other advice I would give is not to ignore any inner voice that seems to be telling you something is wrong. If it feels wrong, then it probably is. And it means you just need more time and information before you make a decision. And whatever your decision is, whether it is to go ahead with conventional treatments or to choose the natural route, it's so important that you get over the initial shock and listen to and trust your intuition. Today, I feel like I'm literally a different person. Cancer has taught me so many invaluable lessons. Cancer forced me to change for the better. I'm in better physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health today than I've ever been in my whole life. I don't believe cancer invaded my body to kill me. I believe cancer was my body telling me I needed to make some big changes. And I made big changes. I made huge changes. And these changes are what makes cancer the gift I believe it to be. Cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. Cancer can save your life.